Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Radical Candor podcast. I'm Kim Scott, co-founder of Radical Candor and author of Radical Candor and Radical Respect.
I'm Amy Sandler, your host for the Radical Candor podcast, and we are so thrilled to kick off our first Radically Candid Conversation of 2024 with Stephen M.R. Covey. Stephen is the global leader for the Franklin Covey Global Trust Practice and the content expert for Franklin Covey's Leading at the Speed of Trust and Working at the Speed of Trust courses. Under Stephen's direction, Covey Leadership Center has become the largest leadership development company in the world. Wow. The best-selling author, Stephen, is of Trust and Inspire, How Truly Great Leaders Unleash Greatness in Others, as well as The Speed of Trust, the one thing that changes everything. Stephen is also a globally sought-after speaker, advisor on trust, leadership, ethics, and collaboration. So we are just so thrilled to have you join us today, Stephen. Welcome.
Thank you, Amy. What a delight and an honor for me to join you and Kim have this conversation today. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being with us. Here's my hope. It's not really a New Year's resolution, but because I'm imposing it on the whole world. So it's a hope, not a resolution. I hope that everyone on the planet finally understands this year that command and control just doesn't work that well.
I think,
I think we really need to learn how to collaborate with each other and to stop trying to dominate one another. And I think your book is an important part of that. So I'm thrilled to speak with you about it.
Well, thank you. I love the hope and agree with it. And at one level, it sounds so obvious,
yes,
and simple, and yet we're entrenched deeply still in a command and control world.
Yes, we are.
And it's like I call it modern day bloodletting. That persists, even though it's been proven wrong, it still persisted for another couple hundred years after being disproven.
Yeah,
because it was just so in the practice.
Yeah, well, and you get a little bit of power, and it's tempting to abuse it. So I'm excited to talk to you more about that part of the problem as well.
Yeah, and just to frame the conversation, Stephen, you have said that the shift from command and control to trust and inspire leadership, that it leads to happier teams, improved retention, increased productivity, improved company culture, et cetera. It all sounds fantastic. We, of course, also, as Kim just said, this is our shared goal as well. One of the things is that many of us, especially those of us who are listening to the podcast, might think, well, I am already a trust and inspire leader, but we may actually not be exhibiting those behaviors. And so I thought we would start just in your own words, distinguish between command and control and trust and inspire, and also this distinction between what you've called, if I've heard it correctly, authoritarian command and control versus enlightened command and control.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So the basic idea is it's almost inherent in the very words itself. Command and control is more of an efficiency paradigm, a thing paradigm. Scientific management is where it's got its roots. And that's why the authoritarian command and control, Taylorism, Frederick Winslow Taylor, and the whole Industrial Revolution, all the progress that we made that was really helpful. But it started with a thing paradigm towards how we view people and things. And whereas in contrast, trust and inspire is seeing the potential, the greatness, the talent that's inside of people. It's a people mindset and paradigm, recognizing greatness and trying to unleash it rather than trying to control it. And so with command and control, I manage people and things. With trust and inspire, it's more that I manage things, but I lead people. Yes, I'm efficient with things, but I try to be effective with people. So it's not kind of either or good and bad. It's and. Mm-hmm. Yes, with things, we want to be efficient and we manage things, but we lead people. And the moment we try to be efficient with people, we lose our effectiveness. So it's a better way of approaching it that leads to the collaboration that is so vital and needed today that you just won't get in a command and control, kind of top-down directive, hierarchical type of approach to leadership. It doesn't work very well. People don't respond to it, especially today. I don't think they ever really have in the past, but it was just more accepted but today it's less and less accepted, and we're not going to attract talent this way. You can get compliance with command and control, but trust and inspire is what's going to get you commitment. Command and control is good for incremental improvement, but trust and inspire is what really yields innovation and creativity. And you can't command and control your way to a high trust culture that inspires, or that high trust culture that collaborates and innovates. So we need a better way to lead in a new world of work. And it's just as simple as it sounds. It's trust and inspire, in contrast to command and control. But Amy, to the point of, there's some gradations of this within the command and control, because we've clearly become a lot better at it. It's not the old authoritarian command and control of the industrial age. People have gotten better, and we've added things like emotional intelligence and strengths, and even trustworthiness and mission, and we become more enlightened. But unless our paradigm has shifted of how we view people and how we view leadership, it just becomes a more enlightened version of command and control, a better version of it, a kinder, gentler version of it. But our paradigm still is that I see people like things, assets I can get more out of if I just am kinder, and how I manage them. But again, people don't want to be managed. People want to be led. They want to be trusted. They want to be inspired. So the move from authoritarian command and control to enlightened command and control is different in degree. The move to trust and inspire is different in kind. It's a sea change. And that's where we need to go today.
Yeah, I think that is so interesting. And the prepositions are really important. With there's a big difference between to, for, and with. And I think with is where we're trying to get. I have another question for you. I mean, I think that, for example, in World War II, there was a lot of concern that the Germans, with their more command and control economy, would be able to outcompete us. And it turned out that that it wasn't as competitive in the long run. That what was more competitive was a more bottoms up, not top down economic planning. And I think that is really that was something that we talked a lot about at business school. Actually,
Absolutely.
Telling people what to do doesn't work, even in a situation where you think it might work.
Yeah, even at a macro level where you think there might be some advantage.
Yeah.
But because it doesn't really tap into the inherent greatness and creativity and capacity that's inside of people.
Yeah.
When you try to direct it or control it.
Yeah.
Or contain it, you can only go so far. You might think I gain an edge in efficiency, but you leave so much on the table.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's an anecdote. Early in my career, I lived in the Soviet Union, and I lived in a dormitory of Russian physicists. And there was a physicist who I became friends with. And one night, sort of over a bottle of vodka, he clutched his head all of a sudden. He said, "My brain, my brain." I said, "What is wrong?" I thought he was ill or something. And he said, I'm told what I can and cannot believe about history and about all these other things. And that is preventing me from making progress in physics. It was dramatic. I'll never forget that moment. And it was to me like a small, a universe through a grain of sand of why command and control just doesn't work for innovation, for really the kind of work that we need to do in order to succeed in today's world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with that experience of having lived in Russia, you've experienced some of this firsthand.
Yeah.
You've seen it at a macro level.
Yeah. Why it doesn't work.
Yeah. And then we see it in organizations too, where some organizations are very still command and control oriented.
Yeah.
In their policies, their procedures, their approach, often in the style of the leaders. And again, they're just leaving, their performance is nowhere near their potential.
Yeah.
Of what's possible, what's inside of people. And just like the example you gave, that there's so much more they could do and give if they had that opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
I'll never forget working before my father passed away. We did some programs together And he'd always ask the audiences, how many of you believe that the vast majority of your workforce has more talent, creativity, ingenuity, capacity, and potential than their current job requires or even allows them to contribute?
Mm-hmm.
And almost
Yeah.
every hand in the room would go up.
Wow.
So much capacity in there. And then the second question was, and how many of you are under more pressure than ever before to do more with less?
Yeah.
And again, almost every hand. So here's this huge juxtaposition. We got to get more done, and yet we're not tapping into anywhere close to the potential, the capacity, and the talent that's inside of our current people. Now, what's wrong with that picture?
Yeah. Why aren't
That's
we
a
doing
leadership
that?
challenge.
Yes.
That is such a powerful image. And I'm curious, Stephen, Kim's story about the physicist in the Soviet Union, about belief, and even what you're saying about the audience's belief. What is your perspective on the belief system that's going to take me, that's holding me in this chasm that I need to cross? What is the belief of someone in command and control? And what do I need to let go of and embrace to have the belief system of a trust and inspire leader?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a great question because, we're the belief system, that mindset can become our world and it perpetuates our world. And until the paradigm shifts, the behavior won't follow in the long run. And so I think there's some fundamental beliefs of a trust and inspire leader that are just more expansive, more inclusive, and more empowering than a traditional command and control manager. For example, you start with the belief of how you view people. So a trust and inspire person says this, that I believe that people have greatness inside of them. So if you buy that belief that there's greatness inside of people, then my job as a leader is to unleash their potential, not to try to contain or control them. So I see the potential. I communicate it to others so that they come to see it in themselves. I develop it. I unleash it. See, communicate, develop, unleash potential, talent. I love how Thoreau put it. He said, it's not what we look at that matters. It's what we see. And so one leader can come in and see potential and greatness inside of someone, whereas others may not. But that leader that does can maybe help communicate that in a way to their partner, their coworker, their direct report, so that they come to see it in themselves. Then they develop it, then they unleash it, they give them opportunities and to put it into practice. So it starts with how I view people. I view people as having greatness inside of them. I also view people as whole people, meaning they have a body, a heart, mind, spirit, and they bring their whole selves to work. And so if I see them that way as whole people, then my job as a leader is to inspire, not merely motivate.
So question for you, how do you make sure that the inspire part doesn't become top down, actually, that it remains authentic, not only for the leader, but also hooks into what each individual finds inspiring? Because what I find inspiring is very different from what Amy finds inspiring, is very different from what you find inspiring. And one of my favorite stories about this is the story of Christopher Wren, who's the architect responsible for rebuilding St. Paul's
St.
Cathedral
Paul.
after the Great Fire. And he comes along and he sees one person and he says, "What are you doing?" And he says, I'm laying bricks." And the next person is building a wall. And the third person is, "I'm building a cathedral to the Almighty." And that story often gets told like that leaders are supposed to say that third thing. And I think that's exactly wrong, because what if the first person loved laying bricks and was an atheist and was not inspired by building, and so I think like it's really important for leaders to remember that they're not responsible for telling other people what gives their lives and their work meaning, but for taking the time to get to know them and understanding what but how do you, like, that's a nuance that often gets that
Yeah,
often gets missed.
I love it, Kim. And I think you're right that we can't assume it's a one size fits all and that what inspires me also will inspire you. So I do think you start from the inside out. So as a leader, you find your why as a leader. You
Mhm.
become inspired because it's hard to an unlit candle cannot light another candle,
Yeah.
but a lit candle can. It's hard to inspire others if we're not inspired ourselves. And so we start with ourselves. What's my why? Find my why. But
Mm-hmm.
then I also am trying to create conditions for others to find theirs.
Yeah.
And that's the nuance you're bringing, is that I'm not force feeding what the why should be for you. Find your why. And we're trying to co-purpose and overlap some, organizational purpose with individual purpose. To the extent there's some overlap, some co-purposing, that's a sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to kind of let people discover this, find it for themselves a little bit, and not push your why onto them as much as saying we want to help create the right conditions for you to discover your why, find your why. I love the Cherokee birth promise that may we live long enough to discover why we were born.
Yes.
For each of us,
Yeah.
find your why.
Yeah.
And help others find theirs.
Yeah, one of the things coming up, Stephen, as you're sharing that reflection is the idea of career conversations, Kim, which is in Radical Candor, and people looking back on those moments in their past, and then where do they want to be in the future, and then how can we start to put together the career path and the actual job tactics that will take you there. Kim, I don't know if I've done that justice or if there's anything more you want to share. And Stephen, I'm curious, do you any stories to share or personal reflections, just even on your own journey of your own pursuit of finding your why, or with folks that you've coached and worked with over the years that you found helpful for our listeners?
Yeah, I would say this. First of all, I love the framing that you just gave, Amy, around this career path and progression, because it's about developing and growing and again, unleashing the potential and the greatness. And so I kind of adopted a personal mantra that I wanted to be true. I don't want to just say it. I wanted it to be really what I felt as I worked with others, that they would feel and experience this from me. So this is how I show up to them, and not just something that I say. And that is that my passion is your potential. Your potential, your talent, your career, what you're wanting. I'm passionate about that, and overlapping that and helping to bring that about and have people feel like they've had an advocate and a champion and an ally in me in what they're wanting to do. Now, does there need to be some alignment with what we're trying to do? Of course. But rather than just having it be all around where the company's going, yes, I want that. But I want it to have them feel like I've got an advocate and a champion for me.
I'm already feeling very inspired. And for listeners who are feeling inspired talking to you with, the idea that your passion is this other person's potential, one of the things that we hear a lot at Radical Candor is, people have read the book, people have attended our workshops, and they'll say, we love this, but it won't work here. Or, but you haven't met my boss.
I'm guessing you hear that too, Steve.
Exactly. Someone doesn't want to let go of control. You've named a few other barriers. And so the barriers I'm talking about for Radical Candor are also barriers that you describe in Trust and Inspire. Maybe you feel like you're the smartest person in the room. Basically, change is hard. And so what would you tell folks who are listening who they really want to create a trust and inspire culture, especially if they want to do it kind of bottoms up?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I'll bet that the barriers to trust and inspire are similar to the barriers for
I pulled them from your book and I was like, yep, check. Those sound pretty familiar.
And I spend a whole third of the book on these barriers, because sometimes it's those restraining forces that get in the way of change. And so we need to address them and show empathy and understanding towards them, so that we're not just focusing only on the driving forces to bring about the change, but we're releasing our brakes, and not just putting the foot on the accelerator, but releasing the brakes as well, that are often those barriers, those restraining forces. I think the overarching barrier to becoming a trust inspired leader is that we think we already are one. So it's kind of like, hey, this is a good idea, and I'm doing this pretty well, but I sure hope my boss hears this or that they hear this or my direct reports or my team. And I think that just kind of is human nature, that we think that the problem is out there. And that very thinking can become the problem. So I think kind of looking in the mirror,
Mm-hmm.
becoming self-aware, because it's about awareness and choice. And it's hard to change if we're not aware. And so I think the first step to the change is becoming self-aware and say, you know what? My intent is to be trust and inspire. I really feel like I want that, believe that, but I need to acknowledge that my style is often getting in the way of my intent. And I may not be showing up that way. I need to recognize that. And, so that self-awareness, I think, is a first step to change. Then I think another key idea behind how do we bring about this change is the idea that we are not our style. We're not a program. We're a programmer.
That is so important, that people are gonna really benefit from hearing that. I have another question for you about that. A lot of our listeners have written to us, and they've said, "We're not leaders. We're not managers. How can I put the ideas that you all are talking about bottoms up?" Like, and this is something I've been thinking a lot. There's so many books on how to be a great leader. There are far fewer books on how to be a great follower and even fewer on just how to be a great colleague, on how to whiff better, in the absence of hierarchy. So I would love to get your thoughts on sort of, it's hard to be anti-hierarchical without talking about hierarchy, but bottoms up, uh, trust and
Absolutely.
inspire.
Yeah. Kim, this is vital because many aren't in, quote, leadership roles or
Yeah.
positional leadership roles, hierarchical roles. But one of the fundamental beliefs is truly that leadership is stewardship.
Mhm.
It's about responsibility, not rights. That's influence,
Yes.
not position. So it may be that you're not managing anybody, but you still lead in a
Mhm.
relationship. On a team, you might be a team member, not the team leader, but you can still lead in your interactions. Leadership is a choice, not a position.
It's really beautiful. And when you're talking about sort of being a programmer versus the program, one of the things that we often talk about is this kind of order of operations when we practice radical candor, that we actually start, especially if we're a leader, positional or influential, we want to start by asking for feedback, by soliciting feedback. And so that would sort of be our order of operations. We start by soliciting feedback. And so I'm curious, what do you see the role of feedback, and especially asking for feedback, in building trust?
Yeah. I love this order of operations, the idea and solicit. So in other words, you model it first before you give.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And yes, we want to give, but by soliciting first, you're modeling receiving feedback,
Yes.
being open to feedback, such that when the time is right, you earn the right, in a sense, to give because you've gone first.
Yeah.
Again, I think we're approaching this so much in a
Yeah.
similar vein that we need to go first. That's the whole idea that enduring influence is created from the inside out as
Mhm.
opposed to outside in.
Yeah.
So my job is to go first. And
Yes.
so I solicit before I give.
Mhm.
And I model the behavior I would like to see. I extend the trust I would like to have.
Yes.
I lead by going first. I model by going first. And that really does help bring it about. So in a relationship, so if we want to see how do we solicit and give feedback better and so that we can improve and get better and bring about this profound change ultimately, well, then let me lead out and be vulnerable, be open. Maybe I declare my intent and say, let me tell you about me. And I open myself up and I'm vulnerable and I'm leading out with this and I'm really saying, help me. I mean, my intent is to get better as a person, as a team member, as a team leader. And so I'm trying to ask what would be more helpful. I'm trying to model this, make it safe for others to give back. I'm going first. So I love this sequence. is vital, that it truly is inside out. That's your expression for that order of operations is this idea of inside out. It's going
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
And I
Love it.
commend that completely. And so here's what's interesting. Let's just take, because I know that you're all about helping to build these, high trust, candid relationships where people can really ultimately achieve this profound change. And that's radical candor,
Mm-hmm.
and personally care, and also challenge directly. And so great, then model by going first and helping to lead out, bringing this about. And I think that the people that do this really best in building trust do a similar thing. Here's what's interesting: you could have two trustworthy people working together, both trustworthy, and yet no trust between them,
Yes.
even though they're both trustworthy, if
Mhm.
neither person is willing to extend trust to the other, to give it. So if trust is the outcome we want, a high trust relationship, high trust team, high trust culture, yes, to get that, we have to be trustworthy. We earn that. That's your credibility. That's your behavior. But we also have to be trusting. We give that. And I find, especially on senior teams and in organizations, that the bigger gap in creating trust is not that people aren't trustworthy, although sometimes that's the issue. It's more often that we're not trusting enough as people,
That
as
is
leaders.
profound. Yeah. That's so it sounds like the first step in the order of operations of building trust is to give trust, not to demand it. And that means making yourself vulnerable and taking a leap of faith, really, very often. Is that
Does.
right?
Absolutely.
What's
Absolutely.
the next step?
So if we would like to see more candor and more openness in giving and receiving feedback, then we model
Mhm.
soliciting feedback.
Yeah.
And once we get it, we model giving that feedback. If you model and go first, then we can get to the challenge directly piece, and
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
which is now I might make a behavior specific request of someone.
Mhm.
I've learned to always separate the person from their behavior.
Yes.
And rather than attack
Really
the
important.
person, instead address the behavior. Make a behavior specific request of someone rather than saying, hey, I don't trust you and nobody on this team trusts you at all. Those are
Yeah,
almost
that's like
fighting words.
that is not feedback. I
No.
literally was coaching somebody once, and they came to me. They were having a conflict with someone, and I was encouraging them to sort of have an open conversation with this person. And they came to me one day, and they're like, "You'll be so proud of me, Kim." I went up to them and I said, "I don't trust you at all." And I was like, "Oh no, where did I go wrong in my coaching?" Not helpful feedback.
Yeah, not helpful. Those are
Yeah.
fighting words and just not constructive.
Yes.
Not
Yeah, they
useful.
never recovered.
Right. Because then
It was
you're attacking the person,
Yeah.
and now they're defensive and they're not ready to
Yeah.
change. But
Yeah.
instead, address the behavior. So you might say,
Yeah.
hey, this kind of behavior
Yeah.
causes me and others to lose trust. When you make a commitment and then don't keep it,
Yeah.
I don't know if I can trust the next commitment that's made.
Yeah.
Or
Mhm.
when you speak, but you're not speaking truthfully, you're
Yeah.
spinning and posturing and positioning, then I'm not so sure that the next time you're speaking, that you're not continuing to, it's
Bloviate.
insincere manipulation, right? That whole
Yes.
piece, that
Yeah.
counterfeit behavior, I call it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you're separating the person from the behavior, not attacking the person. Instead, you're addressing the behavior, then make a behavior specific request of them. So
Yeah.
here's what I would ask of you. Don't
Yeah.
make a commitment that you're not willing to keep and
Yes.
ready to keep and
Yeah,
able to keep.
that would have been
Yeah.
much better coaching than I offered
Yeah.
this person.
Right.
Well,
And if you're
this
going to
is how
speak
we
to me,
learn.
talk straight to me. Talk truthfully to me. Don't spin it. Don't
Yeah.
twist it. Come to me directly. I
Yeah.
invite you to do that. You're making it safe.
Yeah.
But you're
Exactly.
very much telling them how they can behave their way into trust, just like
Yeah.
they behave their way out of trust.
Yeah. And
You
I
can't
imagine
talk your way out. You got to behave
Yeah.
your way out.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And I imagine a big part of this is also demonstrating integrity. And this is tricky. I had a long conversation the other day with someone about a course on how to be a better manager. And this person wanted to start with integrity. And I believe integrity is really important. But I also am like, in a in a day and a half long seminar on how to be a good boss, I'm not sure that like you either talk, and now I'm doing what I said is a terrible idea. Let's talk about integrity in the next 2 minutes. But how do you teach integrity? Like, how do we deal with integrity? It is so important, but it's just not. It's central, but it's not clear to me how to teach it.
Yes, it is central. It's so interesting because when I worked on this Trust and Inspire book, I've highlighted these 3 stewardships
Mm-hmm.
of a Trust and Inspire leader, the 3 things that kind of that flow out of those beliefs, those fundamental beliefs. They model,
Mm-hmm.
they trust,
Mm-hmm.
and they inspire.
Mm-hmm.
Modeling, trusting, inspiring. Modeling is who we are.
Yeah.
Trusting is how we lead. Inspiring is connecting to why. So
Mm-hmm.
what's interesting is, even the expression I use, trust and inspire, I don't use model, trust and inspire, because I wanted it to be in a juxtaposition contrast to command and control. Command and
Mm-hmm.
control, trust and inspire, to make it just fluid and easy, like you've done so well with your brilliant work on Radical Candor, just the expressions of the quadrants and where
Yeah.
people are at. It can capture so much in so little. And a similar thing of trust and inspire in contrast to command and control
Yeah.
to describe it. But there's the 3 stewardships. And at first I thought, I'll just kind of stipulate modeling. And of
Mm-hmm.
course you model. Of
Yeah.
course, that means you're
Yeah.
trustworthy and that you have character, with integrity being the base of that. You have competence. But then as I got into this, I became so crystal clear. You can't stipulate modeling. You
Yeah.
can't just stipulate this
Yeah.
is who you are. We have to
Yes.
be intentional
Yeah.
and deliberate about it, and to acknowledge that the very essence of who we are begins with our character.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our integrity and our intent. I can say this about, you mentioned, talked about my father earlier, Dr. Stephen R. Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The greatest power that he had with
Mm-hmm.
his great teachings in 7 Habits was that he believed it and he lived it as best he could.
Yeah.
He was who you thought he was. And he was in private what you saw in public.
Yes.
And sometimes people can be just dazzle an audience publicly. They walk backstage, they're like a different person.
Mm-hmm.
My father, he was good on stage and he was even better off stage.
Yeah.
And that's
That is
integrity.
wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, there's an embodiment in the behaviors that you were talking about, that alignment, that there's a lack of a gap. I'm so glad you brought in your father, Dr. Stephen R. Covey, and we did want to really pay homage to so many of the contributions that he made to leadership development. And there have been a few quotes. I mean, so much richness in his contributions. Some quotes like "listen to understand, not respond," as well as this idea of communication getting measured at the listener's ear, not the speaker's mouth. Kim, do you have an experience around that quote?
Yes, I do. In fact, I think, Stephen, I sent you an email about this because I thought it was your father who said good communication gets measured at the listener's ear, not the speaker's mouth. And I went to Google to find where he said it, and Google told me I said it. But I know I'm quoting somebody else. I first heard it from a guy I worked with at Apple, Mike Assertion, and he told me your father said it. Do you know who said that? Communication gets measured at the listener's ear, not the speaker's mouth.
You know
I
what?
didn't make it up. I wish I did,
Yeah.
but
I don't know that my father was known for that statement, but he was known for the principle behind it,
yeah.
which is really his habit 5, which
Mm.
is seek first to understand,
Mm-hmm.
then to be understood.
Yes.
And the whole premise is that we all interpret the world as we are, not as it is.
Mhm.
Our head creates our world.
Yeah.
And so if we want to then build trust and build a relationship with others, we need to understand, he called this the emotional bank account.
Mm-hmm.
You make a deposit,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
you avoid a withdrawal. But what a deposit is to another, what a deposit is to you could be a withdrawal to another.
Yes.
And so the first deposit, the very first deposit is to understand from another's perspective what a deposit is to them. So that's the principle behind it. But I don't recall hearing that precise expression of that principle. So maybe, it's not my father per se, but the principle is
the
one that
spirit
he
of your
really
father.
taught.
And I think that was a real paradigm shift to, that idea about perspective. We talk so much about here's my perspective, here's how I'm looking at it. And I love what you just shared. We think about care personally. What would be a deposit in that emotional bank for you? And what I might think is a deposit is actually landing as a withdrawal from someone else. So I love that you shared that.
Yeah, and it's really, really simple and powerful. But my father thought that habit 5 was his most powerful insight into any interdependent relationship.
Mm-hmm.
In a one-on-one relationship, in a team relationship, the idea of seek first to understand, then to be understood. Talk about a order of operations.
Yes.
There it is. And if it were only seek first to understand, that could be the personal care only.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, then to be understood, which is the challenge directly, so that it's not just ruinous empathy of only understanding. No, I'm trying to move into radical candor, but then to be understood. But the sequence matters.
Yes.
And when people feel understood, they are now far more open to be influenced by you.
Yeah, to understand
and to hear you out. And then together you can come up with collaboration, with synergy and creativity, and with new solutions that you don't come up with when people are fighting for psychological air. They don't feel understood.
Yeah.
And so that sequence matters, the order of operations. And that's how he expressed it. And, most people listen not with the intent to reply, most people listen not with the intent to understand, but rather with the intent to reply, to respond. And when you give understanding to another, that may or may not mean agreement, by the way. It just means you understand. You may completely disagree. When they feel understood, that's like giving them air. What oxygen is to the body, understanding is to the heart. And so, it satisfies them. And suddenly now they're saying, and let me be influenced by you. So the key to influence is to first be influenced.
Yeah, it is so powerful. And I'm so grateful that you brought in the underlying habit to our trust practice and trust and inspire practice. And in fact, dare I say, model trust and inspire practice, right? Before we close, we did make an agreement that we would get you out here a little ahead of schedule, Stephen. And so I want to honor that win-win agreement here. You have got 2 courses. I mentioned them at the top, but I just want to make sure for folks who are listening, if they're curious, there's a course called Leading at the Speed of Trust and another one called Working at the Speed of Trust. Can you just tell us a little bit about those courses and what folks might gain from them?
Yes, we've just refreshed these. So this is 4.0 and it's our latest version. And Leading at the Speed of Trust is kind of from the perspective of a leader, a manager within an organization. Working at the Speed of Trust is an individual contributor. And it's the same principles in both, just the context is a little bit different. And it's really just a practical, tangible way of how to build trust intentionally, on purpose, through our credibility and through our behavior. And really describing how we begin with that credibility, and that's your character and your competence. And we go into what we call the 4 cores of credibility, a kind of a deeper dive into character and competence. Integrity and intent flowing from your character, capabilities and results flowing from your competence. That's who we are. And then how we interact with others, our behavior, how we do what we do. And really trying to focus on the authentic behavior that builds trust and not the opposite that destroys it, or the counterfeit that kind of looks the part but is not. It's a it's a fake alternative of it. Now that would be your
Manipulative insincerity.
manipulative insincerity. That part of that passive aggressive type of thing
Yeah.
that you talk about so beautifully. That's a counterfeit behavior, of not really trusting people, not really respecting people, and so forth. But you're faking it, or you're rather than talking truthfully, it's a spin or a posturing and so forth. That can trip people up, and that's the bigger challenge.
Yeah.
Because you talk truthfully, that builds trust. You lie, that destroys it. That's straightforward. It's common sense, right? But where we get tripped up is that counterfeit, where you spin and twist and posture, or tell people what they want to hear or would like to hear, or technically
people
tell the
see
truth.
through that, don't they?
Yeah, they do. They see through it. They feel it.
Yeah.
And it comes across that way. And it actually, that's why I love how you label that quadrant mistrust, because ultimately it does destroy trust.
Great. Well, we will go ahead. We'll put information on that in the show notes. Stephen,
Wonderful.
this has been truly an honor. If you were going to give our listeners sort of that one next step, would it be go ahead and seek first to understand? What would be the one kind of next thing that our listeners can do to build trust?
I would say this. I would say it would be go first. And that includes be the first to understand. Be the first to extend trust. Be the first to model the behavior you would like to see. The openness, the vulnerability, the transparency, the respect, the empathy, whatever it might be. Go first. Whether you're in a position of leadership or not, you have influence, and you go first as a parent, as a friend, as a family member, as a community member, and you're trying to model. We need models today, and the models who can become mentors. We're living in a world that's dangerously low in both trust and inspiration.
Yes,
and it's very easy to become cynical. That because we want to. No one wants to get burned. So we want to protect ourselves, and sort of lead out with trusting feels a little bit risky. And so we're trying to say, look, there is a better way to lead today, or there's a better way to operate, to interact today. And rather than saying, I'm going to wait on everybody else to show what that looks like and say, look, point the finger, I'm just going to try to be a model and go first. And a model can become a mentor. And then we get enough of us doing this. And I know this is the work that you do, the order of operations.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get enough of us doing this, and we can build a critical mass. We can show that there is a better way to lead, and trust and inspire is such a better way, and it works. It's not soft and weak. No, this is the strongest type of leadership and interaction that is possible today. It's strong but not forceful.
100%
It's authoritative without
agree.
being authoritarian. It's what we need, and someone needs to go first. We can be that. Go first.
I love that.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Stephen. It has been such a pleasure.
Pleasure has been mine. I so love and admire the work that you do with Radical Candor. So what an honor to be on this show with you.
We feel the same way about your work. It has been an inspiration for a long time. So thank you.
Thank you, my friends.
Bye-bye. The Radical Candor podcast is based on the book Radical Candor, Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity by Kim Scott. Episodes are written and produced by Brandy Neal with script editing by me, Amy Sandler. The show features Radical Candor co-founders Kim Scott and Jason Rosoff and is hosted by me, still Amy Sandler. Nick Carissimi is our audio engineer. The Radical Candor podcast theme music was composed by Cliff Goldmacher. Follow us on LinkedIn, Radical Candor the company, and visit us at radicalcandor.com.